expecting the intro to go like that, but we'll keep it for bloopers' sake. Holly, get your butt out of my face. I got a video to do. Thank you. Hello, you wunderbar subscribers of the GregsynthWizard channel, and I'm back for the second video of the day. This is going to be a much longer video compared to the previous video, which generally talked about the Discord and some general channel information. This one is going to be more topic specialized, and it's actually a video that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. And, I was kind of thinking, how should I do it? And instead of just writing things down on a comment or Facebook, I figured, let's do a video. Let's get that message out via the voice and the hat and the cat and the Mountain Dew bottle, and we'll take care of it all on this video. And by the way, if you guys like these style of videos where I just generally chat about some topic related to Elton's live performances, let me know what you think, whether you like or dislike it, or leave comments down there, and I read the comments. Don't worry. I read all comments, and I try to respond to all comments. So, I might talk about something else. Maybe you guys can give me some ideas. Feel free. And you can also do that in the Discord, too. This video is going to be specifically about Elton John's live performances, specifically a range of performances. And today's topic of the day is concerning Elton John's quote-unquote prime live era. And for everybody who doesn't know what that is, the prime live era is essentially a set amount of years that happened during Elton John's live performances back earlier in his career, where just amazingly consistent with, his vocal deliveries, amazingly consistent with his, the way he sings songs, his range, his power. It's a range that, some people have different sort of interpretations of what that is. Some people don't even think that the set range that's often cited is his prime live. They may think it's something earlier, something later. But generally, the prime live is an era that started in 1979 on the Ray Cooper tour, and it ended sometime in '86. Now, the beginning of the prime live era usually isn't debated too often. Most of the time, 79 is generally regarded as the start of it. But where it ends is, some people that I know of that really love the live stuff and really like to talk about it, there's not so much as a disagreement as it is, like, where would you put the cutoff point? Because generally 86 is the cutoff point, but it all depends on who is talking about it and who cuts it off at a certain point. Like, for example, some people I know say to cut 86 completely out of the prime live and just have 1979 to 85. And I'm thinking, well, if there were vocal issues the whole year, yeah, I would agree. But 86 was Elton's most cataclysmic year in terms of his live singing. So, the beginning of 86, the middle of 86, and the end of 86 are all different. So I can't just knock 86 off the prime live, even though I can sort of kind of understand why someone would do that, because it's so different. And then the people who keep 86 as the prime live, some people would say, well, it ended after the European leg of the Ice on Fire tour. Some people say it ended at Prince's Trust. Some people would say that it ended early on in the North American tour. Some people even say when the UK tour ended, and it ended there. So even if people are agreeing on the year, you have a different boundaries people are putting on this, and to offer my 2 cents about it, all of those are valid. I can see why somebody would pick that certain point, but I'll go through them real quick here. Um, for for the first one, where they would knock the Prime Live era off after UK, I would generally disagree because there's still shows on the European leg of the tour where Elton is in great voice, still has full access to his higher register, and still has a clean tone, and is still consistent for vocal side of things. In terms of the substance abuse and the mental stuff, that's a whole different story. But generally, I would still put Euro '86 in with the Prime Live because he still has his old voice in there, his pre-surgery, before damage started to happen voice. So that's why I will include Europe '86 with Prime Live. And to answer the next level, where someone would say, well, it ends at the Prince's Trust, which would have been, I believe, at the end of June for '86. That I can sort of see. That I'm a little bit more on board with, because during that time frame, in the spring and early summer of '86, Elton was recording vocals for Leather Jackets tracks. And, you can tell on the album that, his tone is strained, it's scratchy, there is damage on his voice from it being overworked, substance abuse. So it's, and then when you hear Prince's Trust, yes, there is a coarse sound on his tone that is similar to Leather Jackets in some ways, although the range is still there. He's still able to belt I'm Still Standing higher notes like the B flats, and he's still able to hit the higher chorus notes, although the tone is definitely darker and it does sound scratchy to an extent. But he still does a great Your Song, and Little Holly would agree too. Not so much Little Holly anymore, but so Princess Trust, I can see an argument for, let's end it right there. Or even if someone said, well, when he was recording Leather Jackets and destroying my camera setup right there, when he was recording Leather Jackets, we'll end it. But I'm like, it makes sense, but I'm just talking the live stuff here, like in the live environment. And then where somebody else would say, well, it ended early on in North America, and when you look at the North American tour as a whole, yes, Elton's voice did go downhill through the tour. There are some gigs in September, like the last New York show, where his voice is gone, like totally gone. He's unable to effectively sing the material. There's shows in October, like the LA shows, where his tone is scratched out from nodules and very rough, and he has a hard time maneuvering his voice. So, it's a tour where it really highlights his vocal troubles, and you have the Australia stuff, which further highlights it. But earlier in the North American leg, the damage wasn't so great compared to later on. There was still some power in his voice, and the range was still there to an extent. But, there's a cutoff point. And after looking through all of these shows, because I was, in the past, I'm trying to figure out, where was the point where it just went completely south. Now, at the beginning of the North American tour, Elton said that he postponed 2 shows. And those would have been shows that were in Michigan. I believe it was Clarkston or Pine Knob. Might have been Joe Louis Arena, but it was definitely in that era right there. They were postponed because he said he lost his voice. And You know, when you hear the recording we have from Clarkston, some people call it Detroit, but he performed uh, at Pine Knob, which it's now called the DTE Music Theater, or DTE Music Energy Theater. But it's like when you hear him sing there, the range is there. He's still able to hit falsettos. He's still able to hit high C's on songs like "Someone Save My Life Tonight," and he still has good range. The tone is different though compared to even Euro '86. It's a bit more of a like a worn tone. It's not completely the same as what you would hear on the Princess Trust or Leather Jackets, but it sounds swollen, like he's got like a cold or a laryngitis. So there is something different about his tone, although he's still able to effectively sing, and he's still able to sing pretty much all of the original phrasings that he wants to go for. And then when you start going through the early gigs, there's Cuyahoga Falls, there's Kansas City, Bloomington, and Chicago. These gigs are all fairly similar to each other, and I'm also comparing that to the first show that we have available recordings from, which is the Clarkston show. If he's not going for certain notes anymore, there's still a consistent tone to an extent where he's still able to effectively sing. He still has range. He's still going for falsetto notes on Philadelphia Freedom. And even if the top range is missing some of those notes, like the Someone Saved High C's or the Burn Down the Mission High C's, he's still able to effectively deliver the songs with relatively good range. But then after the Chicago show, he does a show in Toronto, I believe, and it's an outdoor show. The band arrived late, and I believe it was raining and storming, and it's outside, and he gets sick because when you hear Montreal, which is the night after that, and we have a tape of that, there's a noticeable change in his timbre compared to even Chicago, where it's more scratchy, it's more something ain't right, even though the range is still there, but there is a drop from Chicago to Montreal. And then you hear Hartford and Saratoga. And Hartford, he's in better form, and he's still going for notes, although there is a marked change in his delivery. He's still going for keynotes on certain songs, but there's a change in like how he's hitting notes. It sounds like he's forcing a lot more compared to even a week before, and he's over singing a lot. And then you hear the next night Saratoga, and he sounds pretty off. He sounds more swollen. He sounds phlegmed out. He sounds sick. Definitely something wrong with his voice there. If he was having issues earlier on in that leg of the tour, they were definitely worsened and amplified by the time Saratoga came around. And then you can follow the voice through September, where it gets worse, and it kind of does a roller coaster where one gig he'd sound bad, like Worcester or Providence or the second Philadelphia show, but then you have other shows like some of the earlier New Yorks where he's passable and sounds stronger. So it's very hills and valleys. So where the prime live voice ends, for me personally, I would say it's going to be in the summer of '86 because of the lack of consistency that will happen afterwards. And then when I say summer, I don't mean something like Saratoga or something like that, because he's out of the prime live by then. But I will probably go with Chicago '86 being the last gig, the cutoff point for the prime live, because it's the last gig where he's going for certain notes. It's the last gig where, even though there's a laryngitis, swollen sound, you can still tell his old voice is there, and he's still going for. It still sounds like classic Elton, despite stuff that's going on. And then after that, even though he still has his classic tone at times on certain songs, certain gigs, it's a lot more inconsistent. So I would put Chicago as the cutoff point for the prime live voice, but I would also put an asterisk right by that saying there are changes, but after this it gets further amplified and it worsens. Um, but I would put that as the cutoff point. And I'm all for discussions. Just leave them down there, and I'll comment on everything I see. And hopefully, I can have some fun. And to answer some questions about the Prime Live era, I'll try to answer some of them that I see mostly thrown around, either at me or just in general. And if the video doesn't answer the questions, you can ask them down below, and I will respond to them as best as I can. But people have asked me about this era of live shows from '79 through to middle summer of '86, about Elton's voice and like why this is prime live, why not certain other eras are prime live, and basically the short version of that story is it's a very consistent time in Elton's live performances where his range is at its peak. He nails songs. He's consistent, and that's the short version of it. But that's not good enough. But it deserves more of a discussion compared to just me talking about it for 2 seconds. And then someone had asked me, well, you say '79 starts it, but why was there anything leading up to it that would start it? And my answer to that is yes. There is a backstory about the Prime Live era and how it started. You can trace it going back to '77, actually. In '77, Elton took vocal lessons from Tom Bell during the recording sessions for the Tom Bell sessions, which were done in later '77. And the first gig where it's post Tom Bell, vocal lessons would have been the retirement gig from Wembley. And yes, Elton does sound good, and he does sound strong, but it's a gig where it's not the best measuring stick to really showcase, yeah, Elton just took lessons and he's in amazing form, because he was going through a lot. It was his quote-unquote retirement gig, and he's not really 100%, there, I should say. Not in terms of, like, mental or being off, but just, it's not really the best showcase for that. And then, before the Tom Bell stuff, you had gigs like Edinburgh '76, the solo show, and someone asked me, well, what about this one? Does this start the Prime Live? And I would say no, because I will say this, though. He does sound great at Edinburgh, and he does sound better there compared to anything from '75 and earlier in '76. And you can probably make the argument that it's the best he sounded in a few years, maybe going back to later '72 or so. But, Tom Bell is after that, and while his natural voice is great at Edinburgh and his deliveries are great, he doesn't have the control that he would have later on in '79. There are parts where he's not singing bits on songs that he would nail later on. He's still cutting notes off, like on Rocket Man, and he's missing or not hitting the pitch right on like some of the songs, like Someone Saved or similar songs. Even though it's an improvement over other stuff, it's not really what I would call Prime Live or even Proto Prime Live. It's just Elton in '76 doing a solo show. And the most you could say is, well, the voice is a little bit more mature compared to earlier, which I would agree with. And then it comes to the Rainbow '77 gig that we have. Rainbow Rock, I think, is what it's called. And it's from May of '77. There, it's pre-Tom Bell as well. And the voice is actually a little bit more mature, and there is a little bit more control to his voice. Although that could be down to just the material and, you know, him having a good time, so he was more relaxed. I know he was, had, I believe, drinks on the piano or something. But but yeah, the Rainbow gig also is one of his best vocal gigs prior to the Tom Bell stuff. Um, Although it's still not quite there. I would say that's kind of like proto Prime Live in some aspects because you can kind of hear the maturation of his voice, being a little bit more prominent when compared to '76. But the foundation still isn't quite there. But you can tell there is a slight difference. And then then you go Wembley '77, the retirement gig where he retires. We went over that. Then you go into '78 where you have two gigs that he played. It's sort of like warm-up gigs for the upcoming '79 tour. And there, it is more proto-Prime Live. The deliveries aren't quite what they would be in '79, but there is a change in his vocal style where he sounds more confident, a little more gutsy. You can tell he's been kind of working on his voice a bit, like he's doing stuff that he wouldn't be attempting if he didn't have the lessons. Like he's trying more gutsy phrasing. He sounds a little bit more stronger. There's a slightly more resonant voice. But, it's basically being built upon. And then when you go into '79, it's that's where the Prime Live voice starts. That's where he has full control over his instrument. He's really going for notes. He's sustaining notes very effectively. And a very flexible instrument. And it's, he had a marvelous voice on that '79 tour. A very youthful voice still, but it's more polished. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. Like if you like Elton's really young voice, but you like to hear like a lot of great live singing and him going for a lot of stuff, this would be kind of like a good middle ground because it has elements of his youthful pre-Tom Bell voice and the training he did, and it kind of mashes together and has this very unique hybrid of voices where he'll manipulate his voice to make it sound more American sounding, so a little more twangy. I know some people have commented that they don't particularly like that style, but for me it's okay. I prefer his more natural voice later on, but for that tour it's a phenomenal style that he does for those songs, and he just sounds great on the whole for that whole tour. And then you go to '80 where he still sounds pretty much like '79, although there's a harder edge building up. Also, he's singing over a band now, so not quite as soft. Great range, going for extremely high notes on songs like Benny and Saturday Night Sorry for Fighting. Still has a young tone to his voice. It's essentially the '79 voice, but more aggressive. That's what I would call the '80 voice. And there's a lot of great performances from '80. It's the tour where he starts to really expand upon that control that he's developing on more up-tempo songs like rockers, like Philadelphia Freedom. It's the first tour where he really started to consistently nail the vocals. And Goodbye Yellow Brick Road sounds great as well. I mean, it's a great tour. And then in '81, no tour dates, some appearances on TV shows, but still very good. '82 tour, another change. His voice has matured a bit more. He can still sound youthful and light, although there's a bit more of a lower resonance developing on his voice. He's able to convincingly sing lower with power, like Blue Eyes, for example. And it's a great tour for diverse singing where you kind of get some elements of his '79 and '80 voice, but you also have like a sort of a middle voice that kind of foreshadows his Too Low for Zero and Breaking Hearts era, but yet has like elements of both. So you have at times a youthful voice, but more power, and it still has great range. So it's a kind of a unique voice in an aspect, but it's a great live voice. And then comes 84. Now in 83, the only tour dates he really did were Sun City shows from October. We don't have any recordings, sadly. I would love to hear them. And then he did that thing on the Two Rodneys with Cold as Christmas, but that's just one performance. That really doesn't tell you a whole lot, but he sounds awesome. But now you go to 84, and then this is a voice I see cited a lot. I do it as well, but other people talk about the 84 voice a lot. They talk about the richness of it and his, deliveries and his power. And the 84 voice is a wonderful instrument. He doesn't have sort of the youthful voice really anymore that he did in 79 and 80, because of age. He's 37 or so, during this tour leg, during the tour. But the instrument is very powerful. There's a lot of resonance behind it. The lows are stronger. He's still nailing falsettos on the difficult songs. Tiny Dancers sounds amazing in 84. Island Girl sounds awesome on like Stockholm. And it's basically a matured voice with so much potential, so much range to it, and control. He just has great control overall on this, during this era. And it's like, if he's going to go for notes, he's going to go for them. And it's almost like a more polished version of his 82 voice, but a little bit lower in terms of his timbre, more mature. But man, does he sound great. I mean, there are shows from Euro 84 that rank among some of his best gigs for his voice. Like there's like Vienna, there's Milan, there's Belfast, Leeds, the classic Wembley, Edinburgh. Just like he sounds amazing in 84. And even in America, where sometimes the substance abuse kind of was screwing around with his mind and stuff, on a good night his voice is at full capacity and he sounds amazing. And even on the quote-unquote off nights of the tour, the range is still there and he still goes for the notes even though they sound rough. And contrary to what sometimes has been said, that is a completely different scenario compared with what happened in 86. Any roughness before the nodules and the laryngitis and the problems in 86, those issues are temporary, just being on the road, partying too much, and he recovers. So, if he's having a bit of an off night on some of the later 84 shows, don't worry, it's temporary. He'll come around. It's separate from the troubles that would happen later in 86. And then you go to 85. And the 85 voice is another unique animal because here he's changes his vocal style to where his emphasis goes on to his mid-range, and he starts to really belt a lot. He belts powerfully on songs. He focuses on his lower range on songs like Cry to Heaven and Shoot Down the Moon. And there's a lot of power to his voice. There's even more power compared with 84. His style changes. Instead of being sort of kind of lightish and flexible, he goes for more of like a heavier style of singing, and it's really influenced by a lot of soul and R&B, and it's a very unique voice, but also a great one. And when it's time to sing those old songs, he steps right up to the task, and he's able to still nail those songs in the original key with the original phrasing. He does change the style to where, even though he's still well capable of singing falsetto and he does a lot of great notes. He changes phrasing to focus more on his belts and his mid-range, so you won't hear as much falsetto on some songs, but it's not because of damage. It's not because of issues. It was a stylistic choice. He does it on purpose, because if you hear some of the other songs that he did during, the '85 era, like "Someone Save My Life Tonight," "Burn Down the Mission," he's still well capable of nailing those demanding songs, and he has so much power and control over his voice that it's crazy. It's like he could not have done this in the '70s from a vocal standpoint, because he did not have the control or the finesse or the power to do what he was doing later on in the '80s. But the '85 and '86 UK voice is just crazy good. It's it really highlights just his power and soul, and his interpretations of songs are just crazy good. And yes, he does overdrive his voice quite a bit more, especially compared to pre '82. For giving it that extra push of power, and it sounds great. Some people think that he sounds too powerful, or he's stepping on the gas too much, which I'm like looking at like, all right, fair enough, but it's still an awesome sound. And then when you go into '86 after UK, Europe '86. On nights where his mind isn't too drastically affected by substance abuse, he still sounds great. But there are certain shows where he's off in his own world, and it impairs his ability to phrase songs properly, like Barcelona and Berlin. Not really the shows I would showcase his voice, even though it is still pretty funny. But that tour still has some great shows like Lille and Madrid and Paris and Munich are great shows, and Vienna has some great stuff, and Rotterdam's just a fun party show with him randomly over singing songs with a rougher voice, and it's a fun listen. But essentially all that is kind of like his prime live, where he's super consistent for the most part on his deliveries, and the range is crazy good. And when people make best performances of Elton John, live, I guarantee you that stuff from the prime live is always in that list somewhere. Regardless of what, I can guarantee you that the prime live stuff gets mentioned all the time. And then something else I like to bring up about the prime live. People have asked me, well, if this is the prime live, are there any other eras that are quote unquote above others? Are there other prime lives? And I would say yes and no. The prime live from '79 to '86 is its own animal in terms of the consistency and the length. But Elton has had smaller sort of mini peaks during his career where it is better than surrounding years or other eras, and there's a lot of special performances. Some eras that fall in that category would be the early stuff from 1970 through about early to mid '72, where it's a raw, hungry voice, but he sounds fantastic. It's a flexible voice, a youthful voice, and he sounds awesome, and he's so consistent during that era, with that three-piece band. It's a voice that is just ready to go, and some great interpretations of songs are there, and I really love that era. I think that's one of the most underrated eras actually for his live singing, because of the way he just phrases stuff, and it's some of my favorite stuff that's outside of the prime live. And then after the prime live, there are some smaller peaks, if you want to call them that, where there's some special performances and just great stuff. One common one is the Ray Cooper shows from 1993 through to the Ray Cooper shows of '95. That whole stretch right there. So I'm talking '93 Ray Cooper, and the 94 stuff with Ray Cooper and some of the face-to-face stuff, and the 95 Ray Cooper stuff. That is an amazing era of singing Elton did live. He's singing just him and Ray. He's not singing loudly over a band, so you can really appreciate his power. The voice is different compared to the Prime Live, but it's one of his best voices because he's still flexible, and even with him, being more conservative on songs, he's so effective with his deliveries. The low to mid range songs when he sings those just sound like god tier. Like if you listen to him singing like 60 Years On from like 94, or I Need You to Turn To from 93, Skyline Pigeon from 93, when he sings the early ballad stuff with that voice, it's just remarkably amazing. Like it's consistent, it's powerful, it's resonant, it's a rich voice, it's a pleasant voice, and he does stuff that he doesn't do in his Prime Live, which surprised the hell out of me. And the voice is powerful and clear too, which adds to it. So it's a great era for singing. I highly recommend any Ray Cooper Elton John show from 93 to 95. Just an amazing era of singing. And then another peak era that, people have commented on it and have left great comments would be from 96 through to early to mid 98. The Big Picture era, the earlier stuff. What a voice. What a voice he had during this era. Took time off after the Made in England tour, voice healed up, and he's just throwing that voice around, just having fun. Very powerful, resonant voice, even more resonant compared with 93, 94. He steps up his deliveries on some songs, like Philadelphia Freedom sounds amazing early on in the Big Picture tour. We All Fall in Love Sometimes from Winston-Salem is one of the best vocal performances he's done in a live setting. Just crazy control. And, he still sounds smooth, and ballads are his sweet spot during this era. Like, he just nails these ballads with power, and he still has a sweet tone when he wants it, so he still can conjure up some youthful tones still, and it sounds great. He sounds, he doesn't sound old. He sounds powerful. And if you want a really good example of this voice, there's a Circle of Life performance that he did solo in 98, I believe, at the Citibank Arena. And man, he sounds amazing. Like, that tone is clear. There's power to his voice. No wavering. Just a powerful, instrument. Prepared to sing that song. It's just great. And then some other eras that are talked about that are, sort of kind of like mini primes or sweet eras. You have the 99 solo stuff, and it can go right through to about 2002, where you have solo stuff, you have the band shows from Songs from the West Coast, and it's a really consistent era. Elton sounds a little older when compared to earlier in the 90s, but, the power's still there. He still has, pretty decent range. His voice is more baritonal, but, he still has, a warm sounding tone to his voice. He still sounds great. And it's some of his best singing that he's done live during, I would say, sort of his, era when he's in his 50s. There's some great stuff, during that era. And then for recent stuff, in the last 10 years, Elton has had some eras where he just pulls off these performances where I'm like, how did he do that? Like, where's he getting this from? Where's that voice coming from? Or how's he doing this? It's just crazy stuff. And there's some great stuff from 2011, 2013. The summer of 2017 has some of his best singing that he's done in the last decade. It's just crazy good. And yes, the voice is much older sounding. It's more limited. I get it. I'm not saying it's anywhere near as good as Prime Live or his 90s peaks or even 2001, but for a man that age, it's pretty good stuff. So I highly recommend that stuff. So I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Hopefully this video answered some questions. If not, just leave them down there. I'll answer them. I'll comment. I want to hear your thoughts, and I can't wait to talk to everybody. So I'll see you all later.